Ladies and gentlemen, it is summer. Well, it's summer planting season, right? We're coming up close to it. So the question on everybody's mind is, when can we plant our summer garden? I know that's something been on your mind, hadn't it, Batavia?
It's my time to shine. Yeah.
Yeah, so here we go. We're going to dive into this, but real quick before we do, I just want to say welcome back to the Backyard Gardens podcast, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ben, and I am with my co host, Batavia. Say hi.
Hi, but
And if you'd like to support the show, you may do so by becoming a patron, a subscriber, checking out our Amazon list, or buying some seeds from us. I know seed starting season is basically over for now, but we have direct sowable seeds in there, so definitely check those out. Perfect gap fillers for your garden, which we'll get into in this episode to some extent. Wouldn't you say?
well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
we're at the beginning of summer. That's what we're talking about. So the theory is, do you really have gaps?
Well,
Maybe, maybe not.
in a perfect world, no, everything would be great, but that doesn't
Mm.
always work that way, as we both very well know in the garden. This is geared towards, and everybody really, but as you go into it, I think it's important every year that we acknowledge the excitement behind the planting season and we quell that excitement to some extent. I mean, I don't know any other way to put it. Can you think of something different?
Well, I mean, I think it's almost impossible given, we're in May now. And if you haven't gotten a head start, this is like the beginning. And some people may even feel like they're early now, when it comes to planting a summer garden in May. Let me get ahead. Depending on where you are in the country, you know. Well, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing to remember too is I didn't realize it was May. Man, months are messing me all up. Some stuff can be started right away,
Hmm.
last frost date, and some stuff needs to be delayed. And we will go into what should be delayed and could be delayed. And then that will kind of help flush out for you as well. So the question that comes up first and foremost is, my last frost date, ooh, that sounded weird, came. Can I just go ahead and plant? I mean, straight up, do I even need to worry about it?
It's conditional. Like it depends, right? So I looked, and the at least the beginning of April was colder in Chicago, in my Chicago area, than it was last April, right? So we had many more days that dipped by. Remember, average last frost date is average, and then we're even talking about the percentage of frost falls into that. So I say that to say, for summer plants, my average last frost date has passed, and a week afterwards, 2 weeks afterwards, it's very common to maybe have a pretty cold day. And this is where I feel like you take more risks than me. Frost at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or technically freezing, 38 degrees is cold for summer plants. So you're
Yeah.
above a frost, but that's still cold for summer plants.
Well, not everybody's spring is equal.
Hmm.
So, my spring will warm up rather quickly, where your spring will warm up slower. So, we can kind of bend those rules a little bit here, where you need to be more careful where you are. I'm in Coast North Carolina, and Batavia is in
Chicago, Illinois.
the great land of Chicago. I was trying to think of something clever, and it totally evaded
Oh.
me. The Windy City, right?
Oh,
Um,
yeah, that's what they say.
yeah, well, it's been the Windy City here for sure. But you know, when you know your climate, and this isn't going to be, look, every time we talk weather, on no matter where we talk about it, people tune out. So you're good. But knowing your climate will help you in the trends of it. So we'll just leave it at that as much as
Hmm.
we can. Um, Now, I will say one thing we push on this show a lot is we push multi seasonal gardening. Which, what does that look like? Spring, summer, fall, and maybe even into winter. So the question becomes, we're going to have to just pretend today, play the pretend game, because first of all, it could be true, but I'm pretending that everybody listening to the show either multi season gardenings or has aspirations to do so. So if that's the case, we need to concern ourselves with, do you need to let your beds rest, especially between the seasons of spring into summer? What say you?
I don't think that you need to let them rest between spring and summer with the great assumption of they had some quiet time before spring. So there was some rest in the winter.
Yeah. Um, I just had a long impregnated pause there because I was thinking, and I'm kind of torn on that. I don't really let mine rest. I push them pretty hard, but I also factor into the wintertime resting periods based on that. I
Mhm.
will grow in my garden throughout every season, but I will put in quicker crops into beds that I want to let rest versus other crops, longer crops at beds that don't really need to rest. So in between spring and summer, I'm not convinced that they really need to rest that much. But if you don't let them rest, I would say you need to be amending your beds and you need to be adding pre-planting fertilizers at minimum. And if you're harvesting your spring crop, something that I do is I will put in fertilizer weeks before I go out because I use an organic granular. It takes time for it to break down and start activating. So by the time I'm harvesting, I'm still that fertilizer starting to kick in.
Yeah, I think it's all vegetables clearly aren't created equal to
Yeah.
the point of every vegetable, everything you have planted is not going to work your garden as much as the next, right? So we think about as we head into summer and some of these crops are heavy feeders. That's very different than resting between, let's say, summer and fall potentially. So the same concept would be true if you're saying, "Oh, consider resting between spring and summer." I'd make more of an argument between resting between summer and fall, and we oftentimes don't do that because now we're on a clock. So when I think about the leafy greens back to spring, when I think about some of the brassicas, which there's some nutrition that's being pulled out of the soil, I feel like, to be quite frank, a lot of the spring things are almost appetizers for the great meal of summer. I'm a little bit biased because most of my experience over the years has been with a summer garden. So that still is like the big show for me, and in spring would again be the opening act of sorts. Maybe fall can be an encore. You see what I did there?
I did. I saw it. Um, for me, it's almost the opposite because
Mm.
the heat of the summer brings a lot of struggle.
Mhm.
So I look at, I kind of look at them all equally. I would say fall is definitely the encore. You're kind of like, you're lucky, especially for us, the way our heat can drag on, we're kind of
Mhm.
lucky if it works. But, um, going into it, you mentioned something about nutrients. Um, it's really important before you go in and you think about, like, okay, what's going in this bed next, that you
Mhm.
try not to put competing nutrient needed plants in there. I don't know if I said that right.
Mhm.
It sounded good in my head, but not when it came out. But what I mean is, if you have, like, most of what we grow except for your root crops are high nitrogen feeders, you don't want to put a high nitrogen feeder in behind it, because that will delay. And this isn't really a planting guide, but this is part of, knowing when to put it in, because when you get those plants out, and the subject of bed resting is, if you have a high nitrogen plant that going in behind a feeding high nitrogen plant, then you've got to kind of really amp up the nitrogen in it. Luckily speaking, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head necessarily that is a specific summer plant that is a high nitrogen feeder. Can you think of one, Batavia?
No.
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff that will hold over, like chard or
Well,
something like that,
technically, beans do require nitrogen.
but they're not a high nitrogen feeder.
Uh, okay. I mean, I think that,
I mean,
so the requirement of it versus something compared to what in spring, compared to like broccoli,
cabbage,
which has to put it
broccoli,
on the floor,
lettuce.
like the actual head,
Yeah.
that requires a lot of work. Um, and
because nitrogen
Yeah.
makes leaves. So, in the summertime, we're not really consuming leaves that much.
We're not consuming them, but it does tie into the health of a plant, not to the extent of it's primarily the thing that we're consuming. So I'll go ahead. No, but then what about beans? I'll stand by that.
Well, I will say this. I have in the past, in the summertime, I remember one year, I was like, I'm going to have the biggest and most beautiful squash plants you've ever had in your whole entire life. And I went through and I gave them some serious nitrogen, and I got the biggest and beautiful squash plants,
Uh huh.
but not the squash. And I remember I went back to the drawing board afterwards. I scratched my head. I was like, man, they're so good. And I didn't really have a lot of issues, but I didn't get anything. And it was because of the high nitrogen. So, yeah. So, luckily, it's kind of almost built into the DNA of the garden to help, as long as we stay within the season. Now,
Hmm.
if you live
Hmm.
somewhere like Chicago, where you can plant some of these spring crops well into the summer, that's going to be a different story
Hmm.
for you. So,
Well, yeah, but it also, so I do in Chicago keep some of my spring crops into the garden way into the summer. That includes your brassica family, that includes your kale, collards, absolutely. It includes your cabbage. I'm harvesting cabbage in some cases in July that was planted in the spring. So, and depending on how mild the spring or the summer was, it could even be like at the beginning of August. So I say that to say I absolutely do it, but there is a slight question mark around just because you can. Is the garden really designed for you too? Right. So you think about those beds and there's still something that those crops need from those spaces. When I have a cabbage plant kind of sitting, right? When I have a kale plant kind of still there, maybe not in the most prime growth area because again the heat does slow things down. Am I better off? Am I doing better for the soil for the bed if I have something again that I can refresh that area with and start anew, if you will? I don't know.
if
I'm
I
not
could
giving it.
if I could grow broccoli year into the summer, I would.
Yeah, I
So,
can't.
yeah, I can't.
I
I
haven't
mean,
found a variety that allows me to, let me say it that way.
it's just not possible here. But what I'm saying is, if I could, I would
Sure.
absolutely view that as like a summer plant. But what we're referring to here, to be very, very clear, are like your tomatoes, squash, corn, all that. Corn is a high nitrogen feeder. There it is. Whew. Okay. There, we got it out of the way. Man, that was stressful. So yeah, you go through it, and there's specific crops, but letting your bed rest, I don't think is super important because we should be building it up to that. We should have let it do it somewhat over the winter, and then re-amending afterwards. So I don't think that's as much of an issue. What we really need to worry about, and the elephant in the room, are temperatures. And I said we weren't going to talk about weather, but we're going to talk a little bit about weather, just kind of eyeballing it and figuring it out because um, the eagerness can be a real issue when it comes down to it. And it's like Batavia said, 38 degrees is not freezing, but it is dang close to freezing. And it can be an issue, but some stuff it doesn't have to be an issue. So,
But my argument always, and I've never been able to do it, what I believe is an adequate garden experiment, excuse me. It's you put a tomato plant in the ground at 38 degrees Fahrenheit because it's past your average last frost date. Sure, the tomato plant may not die, but did you stunt it? And then more importantly, even if you didn't stunt it, are you just buying yourself a little bit of maybe less pressure when it comes to your schedule? Because my theory is if you plant, let's say on April the 21st, which is past my average last frost date, a tomato plant, and then I plant one, I'm willing to say even May 21st, do they eventually catch up to each other? Because technically we're past, a month past our average last frost date before the weather really heats up, before those plants can really thrive, right? Like there's almost even a level of dormancy, I think, for those plants when they've been planted early and not so ideal conditions.
I think it comes down to the amount of shock. So over the years, I've kind of gone back and forth about it a little bit.
Mm.
Typically, what I do, I say typically because things are different this year, which we'll get into. I wait until about a week after my last frost date. Um, usually in April we get one, and it's been like the day of the last frost. We'll get one solid frost, and then we kind of, you come out of it. Well, this year it's been a little bit different. We haven't had a frost in about a month, and I've been sitting idle, waiting and waiting and waiting for it to see like what's happening, what's going on. And we're coming up like I now in my forecast, what is that? Is
The
that
past weather.
timeanddate.com?
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Shout out to timeanddate.com. Um, so that last frost date is now in my forecast, and it is outside of my, or it's not in the extended forecast, it's in the near term forecast. And so what I'm seeing is like we're not going to get it, so we're going to go ahead and plant a little bit early. But for instance, tonight at the time of recording this, it's going to be 38 degrees. So what am I going to do, right?
Yeah.
And I think I've made up my mind. I don't think I'm going to do anything. Everything is sitting outside, and I think I'm going to roll the dice a little bit. I may throw a towel over them to give them a little bit
See,
of insulation, but I've kind of gotten to the point where it's like I can't carry 8 trays of plants in and out anymore. I'm physically, mentally done.
yeah, about a week before our average last frost date, we had temps that got down into like 26 degrees Fahrenheit. And not talking about summer plants at all, but it's the things that I have that I've hardened off that I haven't planted yet, that I had to make the decision of, all right, these things are cold hardy, but it's 26 for these small plants that haven't had a chance to get acclimated in the soil. Is that too much? I decided not to take the risk, and I hauled the things into the garage and provided a little bit of cover. Again, the garage is not heated. So, I mean, it's only going to add so much warmth to it. So there's that. But I want to talk about the temperature from a, we're always talking about how cold is it. I'm also talking about how warm it is. So it again ties back to maybe it won't do harm necessarily, but how much are you really gaining, right? So as I was looking at timeanddate.com for the past weather, April of 2024, so last year, I had the very last week of April in Chicago, temps that got as low as, 35, 36 degrees. Sure, there were some 70-degree days, and those are the days that you thrive in. But again, what's the consistency of that weather, right? So if I had 2, 3 weeks of 60, 70 degrees, get out there and put those tomato plants out there. They're going to really take off when I get to 80, but they'll be just fine at 70, at 60. They'll likely be fine at 50, but I'm not getting that much of a return on this early planting at 40 degrees, is my point. So are you then able to allow your spring plants a little bit more time, and enjoy those? I don't know. I mean, this all depends on your garden. Young Ben has already pulled a lot of his spring plants out because, in part, he had to. Remember, I talked about being able to allow some of these things to continue to grow, although they were planted in the spring because of my weather and my climate. So,
Yeah. Well, we have to keep into consideration too, and I think this is something that we tend to forget about a little bit is sun angle here. So for me, 65 degrees can be a lot warmer almost because the sun is a little bit higher here. We're closer to the
hmm.
equator than you are there. So I look at it like this. And I mean, this is all because of how my weather is. When we are in the 40s at night, we're in the 60s to 70s during the day rather consistently. I don't think we'll have another 50-degree day until probably December. So if we keep that into account, then it's totally different. But for you, Miss Batavia, it's completely different. Like you absolutely can have a 40-degree day night and a 50-degree day, right?
And overcast.
And overcast. And that is a recipe for disaster. So you want it's no different than our winter plantings. when we look at it and we say, hey, it's all about the recovery time. We've talked about this before. The recovery time is everything when it comes to your planting. So, what does that mean? That means how warm does it get during the day so the plant can recover? I
Mhm, mhm.
think that these plants, and we are just mentioning tomatoes a lot, but we are not talking only about tomatoes. And we will get into ones that just kind of fall outside of it, but we're talking about,
Sure.
nightshades and stuff like that. I think they can absolutely 36 degrees is just fine. It's how
Mm.
long are you at 36 degrees? How does that work? Like when it comes down to it and you start breaking it down, are you at 36 degrees at 10 o'clock at night all the way until 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning? Well, that's maybe an issue. Or are you at 36 degrees for an hour? And then it starts, as soon as the sun comes up, it starts to warm up. Like, how fast are you warming up? Which brings into the discussion of low tunnels. But we're going to shelf that because that's just kind of throws the whole conversation out of whack. You know what I mean?
So I rarely speak in absolutes, but I never want my tomato plants to be outside newly planted at 36 degrees Fahrenheit. I never want to put myself in that position. If I find that my tomato plants have been out at 50, 60, 70 degrees for 3 weeks and we have some kind of random complete drop, then that is what it is, but I'm not making a plan to say we're above freezing, we're past my average last frost date, and I want to put tomatoes and peppers out and I have a, high 30s, it's going to be the low. Like that's never going to be my plan. That's where I am a bit more conservative in the garden.
I just put a tomato plant in the greenhouse. You know how I just tested out, even though I don't have hopes for it at all doing anything.
Mhm.
But when I planted it, I was thinking about it and I was like, well, I don't want to dig down really deep. So I thought to myself, well, let me plant it sideways. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to see how long it would take that plant to, how the stem will bend up. I wanted to see how long will that take because that's an indication of a couple things to me. One, it's an indication of the resiliency of the plant, the
Mhm.
health of the plant, and one could argue the settling of the plant getting into place, right? So I did that and it got kind of chilly that night. It hasn't gotten real cold recently, but it took 2 days for that plant to perk up and start growing. So what that told me was, or it didn't really tell me anything. It put a question into my mind: is are we giving these plants enough credit, right? And I know there's a lot of people. I talk to people all the time. I've had them planted since a month before my last frost date. You'll be just fine. Well, I'm like Batavia. I don't do that. I'm pretty. I spent 2 months growing these plants. I don't really want to take that chance and mess it up. So I want to be very careful. I don't want to throw it out because I don't, even though the store has them, I don't want to go into the store and purchase them. I want to plant what I grew for my purposes. So I'm very careful about it. But at the same time, I'm looking at these plants and I'm saying, hey, this plant's getting root bound. It needs to get
Yeah.
out of here. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Because a plant getting overly root bound can be just as damaging, if not more damaging, than putting it out into, cooler temperatures, not frost, but 36, 38 degrees. It can do almost the same effect as far as like stunting it and messing it up. So that's why we went ahead and said, hey, you know what? We've got to go ahead and start planting. Like they're getting unruly. We're having an issue. I'll throw a towel over them tonight for a little bit extra, but I'm not going to pull them in
Mhm.
because it's too much. I just can't do it.
Yeah, I think a couple of notes here. So there is some assumption that you've hardened these things off, and so if your weather is getting cooler, chances are that they may have been outside with some cooler temps anyway. So there's that. I did this through video and pictures for some years. Now I'm actually putting kind of paper to pen, so to speak, or pen to paper. Um, Documenting this and whatever that means for you becomes really important, right? The garden memory is not always true, right? Like the idea of when people say, oh, it'll just be fine, it's because they have the experience of doing it in most cases in previous years. How do you gain that experience of doing it? And then again, what you remember being true is making a note of it. So, when did these plants go out? We'll get into things like sweet potatoes versus things like squash and cucumbers and so on. So, when did those things go out and how did they fare based on the temperature? I hit the bell because I continue to say, what do you gain? But something like your plants are outgrowing the area that they're holding pen. Your plants may be root bound. That is so important. I would be willing to, not 36 degrees, but willing to risk things by my view to move them from the place of on my back porch struggling to in their plant home, right? That they're going to always do better there, even with these kind of questionable temps. So if you have potentially started things a little earlier than you probably should have, you make a note of when it was started, when, kind of the growth rate, when you really felt like you had to get it into the ground, and you pay close attention, and then you make adjustments next year. Like that's a part of this. This isn't just what we're doing for this growing season. We're creating a history for ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, what happened was I was my tomatoes were struggling a little bit. So I said, hey, let me move them outside and then they
Mhm.
will get the full effect of the sunlight. And obviously it worked, but here we
Mhm.
are. And is it that big a deal? Not really. I mean, look, I'm getting them in the ground a week earlier. Big deal. You know what I mean? But at the same
What's your
time,
forecast though?
my forecast is looking pretty good. I don't know off the top of my head. It's like 70s and 80s during the day and 40s and 50s at night. So, it's
You know I still
looking.
have your weather on my app.
I know you do. That's why I'm not concerned about knowing it off the top of my head. So I go through and I look at it. And I'm like, okay, but if you are in a different situation and you're consistently getting those 36-degree nights, then that's something to be concerned about. Now, we do need to factor in, different methods like coverings and stuff like that. So my tomatoes have been outside for a month in the greenhouse, which is basically the same thing as a low tunnel. So they have been adjusted to cooler temperatures, but still within the greenhouse 5 to 7 degrees above. So if it's 36, it was 43, so on and so forth. So they've been adjusted to that. So the way I'm looking at it now is because they've been out there for multiple weeks, not just a couple days,
Yeah.
multiple weeks. They've gotten to where, some of them died off. They were going to die off anyways. Some of them died off because they got shaded out as well. But those that have made it, which are quite a few of them, will now go into the ground because they have shown that they are more robust. And looking at this weather, like I said, I'm looking out 10 days now and I'm not seeing anything crazy. And on top of that, we know within those 10 days, as a matter of fact, within the next 6 days, our last frost date will come to pass. So our chances of a frost at that point are about 10%. I'm
And
willing to
just to
take that
clarify,
chance.
we're in April recording. You'll hear this right at the start of May. So for your forecast, I see the lowest temp is maybe one day, one night probably at 44. There's one more night at 47 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're still in the high 40s just about as far as your lowest temps. And there's 60 and 70-degree days. When I talk about not taking the risk, like under these conditions and knowing what your next couple of weeks are generally like, I'm all for it, team. Go ahead and put it in the ground, right? I do want to ask though, what do you what do you mean when you say some of them just weren't going to make it? Were they just weaker seedlings to
Yeah.
begin with?
Yeah, they were just weaker to
Mhm.
start off with. I mean, there's not much so much I'm willing, it's like you got a tray of 50 plants and you got five of them that are struggling. The other ones need
Yeah.
water and those don't. It's like, well, I'm not willing
Yeah.
to do the work to pull it out, water the other ones, put them back
Yep.
in. I just said, you know what? Screw you. You didn't make it. Sucks to be you. You have, you bought the Walmart jeans. I don't know what to tell you.
You didn't fulfill your life's destiny. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's harsh, but whatever. That's the way I live my life. Get over it. So we'll move into that. But I know there's a lot of people that are kind of like teeter on that line. And I know in my area, there are quite a few people that will plan out way before me. But every single time, every year, and this year I'm not selling plants to the public, general public. But when I did sell plants every year, I had people come back to me and say they were doing so good. And then it happened, you know. And the
Yeah.
thing is, let's say you want to be brave and you want to put them out. And you're like, you're willing to do the work, and you say, hey, I'm going to do a low tunnel over them. That's fine. But if your weather's kind of weird like mine and you can go weeks without a frost and all of a sudden get one, you have to think that plant as it grows can outgrow the chances of you being able to put it in a low tunnel.
Yeah, for
So,
sure,
and
for
that's what
sure.
happens to these people because in our area, it's not uncommon after February for us to get two more frosts, three more frosts, but and that gives you false hope. But once you've been burned a bunch of times, you know, it's
Mhm.
like David. He touched the stove one time, he ain't touched it again. You know, actually he did it twice. So after the second time, he didn't do it again. So after so many times of getting burned, you kind of back off. And you're like, no, I'm good. I take my chances.
Yeah, there is something to be said about, like, just doing it to get it done, right? So, I am very close to, putting some plastic, which I haven't done in years, putting some plastic on um, my beds because it's been so wet here this spring. And, I'm managing a schedule here. So I just can't walk out at any time during any days to plant. And it's like I'm trying to plant after 3 days of rain. So these are spring rains. And so this soil is already saturated from some of the snow we got. We didn't have a really heavy snow year, but we still had snow sitting on top of these beds. And so when you talk about kind of the steps that you take, I get the idea of, all right, I finally have a window here, both from availability, from a weather perspective, from the size of the plants that I want to put out into the garden. I have all of that lined up. Let me get these things planted. And then you have kind of a cold spell that comes. What do you do? So I definitely get the idea of, let me get this work done. Let me take some precautions, right? Because in most cases, what we're talking about is you're not going to have, if you're talking about planting now or early, you're not going to have like a week of cold weather. If you do, you looked at the wrong app when it
Yeah.
came to your weather.
Yeah.
Like, generally speaking, it's going to be that kind of spot cold.
Now,
And the spot cold can get some damage done,
what
but
what about direct sowing? Can you direct sow a little bit
I'm glad you
early?
brought that up. So in both cases of transplanting and direct sowing, the warmth of the soil does matter, right? So I could go out there right now and direct sow some cucumber, seeds. And if I do, how warm has that soil been? Which there are methods you can use to warm it up. How warm will the soil remain? And then what happens once those plants actually emerge? I had in early April sunflower seeds that had popped up, right? The temperature was prime for it. We know that that's a heat loving crop, right? Am I going to let them stay? I shouldn't, but how do they fare when I can go out and see we had 26 degrees last night. What are they looking like now?
Yeah. Well, so this is a little bit more complicated, but thinking about it like this, if I planted my green beans a week ago maybe, and the way I looked at it was I have volunteers come out all over the place every year. And the thing about it is they sit in the soil all winter and they grow when they feel like it. Um, so I went out and I planted to see what would happen, and I started thinking about it, and I say, okay, what is the time frame for a seed to germinate? Across the board, majority is 7 to 10 days. So I looked at it and I said, look, 7 to 10 days. What's the weather going to be like? We live in a time where we can kind of get the idea. And I said, look, it's going to be pretty decent. Well, it's a day early, but guess what's popping up? So I'm planting out tomorrow, but my green beans popped up a day ahead of time. But still, that plant, the seeds have been in the ground, they've been cooled, all that stuff. It's a totally different ball game than when you start planting out transplants, right? I mean, your transplants come from a temperature controlled environment, and then you put them out and you shock them. Well, when you do a seed out in the ground, they don't have that temperature control. They're growing. I personally believe, as much as I love starting seeds, that direct sowing seeds of any kind are the strongest and the best growers that you could possibly get, because they just have been going through the struggles, and they have made it through the temperature swings, the dryness, the wetness, and all that stuff. I just think it's better across the board. I could be wrong, but generally speaking, that's what I think.
Well, we say things like when a plant is, you start things indoors, we recommend running a fan because it's going to help that plant stem be stronger. It's the best version of us, imitating what's going to happen outside. Inherently, we're saying a part of outside and being in the elements makes that plant stronger. Right, so I have lettuce that germinated, which again, the conditions were not only proper for it to germinate, it's, self-seeded from last year. The lettuce is doing just fine. It's not at the point where it's, cold, burned or anything like that. These, again, it's a cool weather crop, of course, but my point is, just like you're going to have tomato volunteers, they're going to pop up. I rarely have pepper volunteers, but these things happen, and that's when the soil is saying it's time.
If you wanted to be a gambling person next year and you just said, look, I'm going for it, you go out there in the fall and just direct sow everything that where you want it to grow, and don't do anything else, and see what happens. You know, and
I
and
love that idea.
and so heavy too. Everywhere you want a tomato, put 10 seeds to see what would happen. I would be curious. Everything would be delayed. You would get later harvests and everything, but I bet you'd
Mhm.
have a stronger plant. I mean, I've got tomatoes that are coming up. I've got pumpkins that are coming up. I've got squashes that are coming up. I'm with you. I don't think I've had peppers. I think they're a little bit more sensitive. They're definitely more temperature sensitive into the germinating
Mhm.
aspect, but I bet if you left them there long enough and you didn't water at all, that's the other key. Don't water, just leave it, walk away. I bet you'd be surprised on how your garden would do. Now, the problem is I'm not willing to take that chance. So,
Yeah, I
um,
mean, it's that's one of my favorite as I listen to a garden experiment. I wonder if pepper seeds tend to rot more than,
they
let's
do
say, a
in my
tomato
house.
seed does. Yeah, so, I mean, in the outdoor conditions, that may be why we don't see as often a pepper volunteer.
Well, you may
Or
not
it could
be.
just be like, tomatoes are just resilient, dude.
Well, if you think about
It's
it
people's
too,
champ.
if you grow bell peppers, you're not leaving a bell pepper to drop seeds out in the garden. Really, you're pulling most of them bad boys
Mhm.
in. So,
Mhm.
um, we need to get into what needs to be delayed, though. Okay, so specific plants that it needs to be at minimum, I would say 45 and up, and really needs the heat. So, um, my first one would be melons. So melons need to be warm. They don't really like the cold at all. And I've had them visibly get stunted from trying to grow in cold. So what I'm going to do this year is plant them when I plant everything else, but remember that delay time. So that's going to be a little bit later. And also remember my climate here, my overall climate, it gets warm very fast in the spring. We often joke how we go straight from winter into summer. I mean, it's 89 degrees the other day, like
Yeah, that's
89
wild.
degrees. And that was at the last day of March. So
Mhm.
what do you do? The other day is over a week ago, but still. So it's like we will warm up faster. I mean, when's the next time you're going to see 89 degrees, Batavia?
It'll probably be when we're listening. 89 degrees? No, I'm thinking like Memorial Day. J Shit. 4th of July? 89
Yeah.
degrees?
You see, so there's a difference. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
What's one for you that just needs to be delayed?
Yeah, sweet potato slips, absolutely, sweet potato
Yep.
plants. Hard stop. I won't even plant them unless I'm at above 50 degrees Fahrenheit consistently, which ends up being before it can become consistent, I'm already sitting at 60. And that's, that's just fine for me. Um, I believe that, not to say they can't rebound, but for me in my area, my short season for something that's really heat loving, right? My tomatoes, my peppers, they do fine. Squash do fine, but a lot depends on how many hot days my sweet potato plants have. And
Yeah.
while it seems counter to say, let me wait and delay it, the setback is what I want to try to avoid. I've seen extra sweet potato slips have the leaves turn instead of green, very purplish. I could see the scald, the cold scald on them. And so there's that time that now not only does it have to acclimate to when I'm planting, it also has to repair itself as well, if I didn't delay it. So
Yeah.
sweet potato slips, absolutely.
Yeah, I think sweet potatoes is a really good one. I do the same thing. I've got my cabbages planted up there, so clearly, I'm intending on putting my sweet potatoes in later. Um,
Hmm.
Another one that I would say is okra. Okra is another one. I mean, it grows really fast, but it doesn't grow really fast until the heat. So be careful with that. You can start it inside if you want, but you can also direct sow it, no problem. Um, I've done it right at the last frost date, and I've done it 2 weeks after my last frost date, and it has grown better every single time about 2 weeks after. So that's what we're aiming for this year, is about 2 weeks after our last frost date. But our last frost date was 3 weeks ago. So you can kind of see where this is the problem we're having this year, is we're trying to figure out, like, should we amend it or should we keep it? And this is something I got to figure out on my own. There's no written rule behind it.
Yeah, my okra and sweet potatoes are probably on the same schedule as to when to put them out, and when to put them out, okra in particular, in a ideal spot. Because I too would prefer to direct sow all of it. But I know myself, I know the time that I end up losing, I know the pests that I end up battling. So I am always doing a combination of both, transplanting and direct sowing. But okra, I found I've planted in certain areas and it's just been slow to take off because it's cooler than okra likes. And then in some cases, I've not put it into the sunniest of spots. Transplanted okra has done just fine for me, right? Like I've transplanted some pretty large plants, for okra, and people have opinions about they prefer not to be. Maybe they prefer not to be, but it ends up working out because now they have that head start and they also are being transplanted when summer is truly here from a temperature perspective in my
Yeah.
garden. So
Yeah.
mine would be, I think, I'm gonna do one more
Go.
just because I need to challenge you on. I would have had beans as my first one had you not presented you just planted beans a couple of days ago. And I just said the forecast is gonna have you at a low in 40 something. Like I'm almost shocked. Well, it's you, so I'm not completely shocked.
Well, I
But
mean, so look here. I mean, let's, if you want to break it down real quick. First of all, I got enough bean seeds. I mean, Jack and the Beanstalk ain't got nothing on me, Jack. You know what I mean? Like, there's plenty. They're fast growers, so it's like, hey, why not see what happens? You know what I mean? And if it works out,
mhm,
great. But I also need to remember, during this time when it was growing, they were at a warmer temperature in late March than normal. So I need to keep that in mind. But yeah, it was just something that I wanted to do and give it a shot and see what happens.
mhm.
So
Okay.
um,
Okay.
another one too is corn. So, and there's a trend here with all these that we'll get to in a second before we go to the question of the day. But corn needs to be a little bit warmer, wouldn't you say?
From the experience over the last handful of years I've had, yes.
Yeah.
And it tells you when it's not happy. Corn is probably the harder ones that we're talking about. Maybe they're all kind of hard. I say because for corn, when it's at knee high by the 4th of July, right? So if you delay too far, you're not going to get into the prime time frame for the growth that then ultimately leads into, the the pollination that ultimately leads into the head. So I've had the first set of corn grow and do well.
Right.
Then I've had like a second sowing of corn, which is later in the summer, which means those plants are pretty small by the 4th of July. And they've been questionable. Because remember, my hot months are July and August. What we have for weather in June and what we have for weather in my Chicago garden in September becomes questionable.
Right. Yeah, corn is I don't know, man. I used to like not care about it all, and for some reason I'm obsessed with growing corn now. I don't know. You think that's what it is? I think yeah, it's beaten me
Absolutely.
too many times. Yeah, it's kind of like the
Yeah.
Brussels sprouts. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I'm not ashamed to admit it. I'm not gonna get beat by no damn corn plant. Shoot, hold my seltzer water. Let's do this. So yeah, we're going to do it. I mean, I know that I definitely wait until. So the bed that I'm going to put corn in this year, I have lettuce and mustard left in it, and they may go start bolting within the next week or two. So we're clearly waiting to plant it, so you can see how we are really running that course and saying, hey, this is going to go in, and this is going to be delayed because of the other plants that are in place. So it's going to be a
Hmm.
quick turn and burn, right? Um, the other thing too, there's a common thread between all of these plants we just mentioned. And the common thread, I'm going to just take it out of the air, is they are all recommended to be direct sowed. Every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you don't have to direct sow them, but they all are. So what does that mean? Quiz
Well,
time.
shoot, I don't know. I didn't think that's what you were going to suggest.
7
I
to
mean,
10 days for germination. So
okay.
keep that in mind, right? So if I say, and again, we have, I wish I knew everybody's listening weather. I really do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But we don't. So for me, it says, okay, if I know it's 7 to 10 days to germinate, then I pull something up, I sow them a week after my last frost date. Then they'll germinate about a week after that. So then that's 3 weeks after my last frost date. Knowing my weather, I should be good. And so that's usually how I operate that, right?
The big asterisk is a week after your average last frost date. You have the temperature that's required for those seeds to germinate. That
Right.
I mean that I keep on coming back to that,
Yeah,
right?
you
Like,
have to have the temperatures, absolutely. But I have those temperatures, is what I'm saying. I know I have
yeah,
those temperatures.
yeah.
So and
Air
and
temperature is what we normally talk about, but technically it's really the soil temperature is what we're talking
yeah,
about.
and I mean you
And you've
can.
had so many days of those high temps where your soil, while it probably didn't even freeze this year, your soil definitely is warm enough.
Yeah, my soil never freezes. It's
Hmm.
very, very rare. But
Hmm.
it doesn't mean your soil has to be the right temperature. Like if your soil's not within the range, it's not going to germinate. What it means is if they're not in the right temperature, it's going to be delayed. So your 7 to 10 days could be 15 to 20. But the problem is those seeds could rot.
Yeah.
So there is an issue that you've got to be very careful about there. So
Hmm.
you start factoring all this stuff, and there's a lot there. There's a lot to digest in that. So we just
Hmm.
kind of keep it under control, keep your cool, and know we're excited, but don't be too excited because we got to do the listener question of the day. And before we do, I do need to tell you, the Planter app is a sponsor of the show. Use the link below. Get 20% off your lifetime membership. Look, I'm not even going to say anything else because you're going to want a lifetime membership because this is the most single thing that has changed Batavia and I's garden throughout the years. It is so helpful, and there's so many new um, features being added. Batavia, do you remember the other features from last week that I announced?
No.
So there's a light meter that was added. So if you hold your phone up underneath your grow lights, it uses your sensor in your phone and tells you the strength of the light at the distance. Can be very useful. Gives you a little guide on what's good and bad and all that. I learned something new when I tried it. I had a sneaking suspicion. We did test it, and I had a sneaking suspicion, and I got a little bit of a gap. So I need to work on that. So,
Yeah.
that I mean, that's a huge part. And the thing is, it's all integrated. It's like an all-in-one deal. So check it
Hmm.
out. It's the Planter app, the Planter app, and it's available on your Google and Apple Play Store. Ding. Link below. Okay. So we've got a very interesting question today from a listener. And it's I had to pull up the definition to it, so we're going to discuss it very briefly. And if you want to do an episode about it, earmark it. We may have to. I don't know. Let's see here. So the question comes onto bygquestion@gmail.com. Feel free to send us a question. Link is below. So the question is, Sarah writes, I'm curious to hear your perspective on land race gardening. It's all one word. I hear a lot about heirlooms versus hybrids, but rarely hear anyone talk about creating land race varieties that are locally adapted. Thank you. Okay. Do you know what it is, Batavia?
Well, you told me at the beginning of the episode that this was going to be today, so I Googled it. Hadn't heard of it before it described in this way or with this
Right.
name.
So, what the definition is, and if you just Google it, I pull it up. What is the land race method? It's land race gardening is all about the survival of the fittest. This method is when gardeners take the best seeds from previous years and plant them in this year's garden. And so the idea is that would produce stronger and stronger plants, and over time would create a more locally adapted plant.
Hmm.
Okay. So what do you think about
Yeah.
the land race method?
Well, I
Be
mean, I think
honest.
well, so I Googled it at the beginning of the episode, which was 50 minutes ago. So I haven't had a chance to look down and even read that description. So I'm glad you read it aloud for us. I think the concept makes sense. I'm struggling to figure out if this is, simply a new name for a concept that's been in practice for, all the long days. When I think about when people talk about volunteers being a stronger plant because it comes from the plant that was there last year, when we talk about saving seeds, we talk about that not just to be able to save yourself money, but that plant, you're saving them for the strongest plants in your garden. That plant performed well in your garden this year, you're saving those seeds. It should perform better than the seeds you got in the mail, next
Right.
year. Like that's the idea, because the DNA has in fact been changed by the growing area it's growing in,
Right.
right? And so your plant's made the adjustments that it needs to make. And now, year over year over year, you're doing this. You should have stronger plants. But then again go back to the how much of a difference are you going to see in the yield? Stronger plants, I immediately think produce more, but I think we have to also consider do better with fighting disease, do better with fighting pests. Those are the points where I'm just like, instead of getting 100 tomatoes, if I get 98, that's fine, even if it's a lower production. But if that plant stays healthier longer, sign me up.
You forgot one word
L
there.
L LRG guard what LRG landrace
Land
gardening.
land race
Landrace
gardening.
is one word, but
So you forgot one key word there. Local disease, pests, and temperatures.
well, I wasn't talking about diseases from your garden in my Chicago
Well,
garden.
that's what land race is all about, right?
Well, yeah,
So
well, yeah.
so
It's
I
a
li- I like the fact that you brought up like it's a method with a different name because I mean honestly it is just seed saving practices, like good seed saving practices. There's a misconception that if you save a seed that and you plant it the next year, it's going to be stronger. Well, we've talked about this and I've actually read a lot about it. It takes about 5 years of this practice in order to start to localize a seed. So, within a 5-year time frame of doing this, and we have to understand here, you're talking about creating almost you're talking about localizing a species of a plant, a variety of a plant to your area. You have to get on top of your cross pollination, your seed saving practices, all that stuff, and continuously do it. Save from the best, strongest plant, which normally we should do. If you get a weak cucumber plant, you don't want that seed, right? If it gave you one cucumber, you don't want that one cucumber seed. You want the one that produced 50 next to it. So that's what you want to do, which is just generally good seed saving practice. So I don't think, and look, there's a book about it, and I'm sure the book goes into way more detail, and I'm about tempted to read it, but not really because I don't have a whole lot of time. The issue I have is, and it's not a secret. This is not a secret. I don't do different methods of gardening. I garden the way I want to and what works best for me. So I have a very strong opinion when I see something with method behind it. And I feel like it muddies the waters for gardening and it's confusing to people. And we have to understand that it takes time to create something to this magnitude. Heirlooms, hybrids, all that stuff, it's different because you're not taking specific traits from specific plants and doing and combining and cross-pollinating to create something different. You're literally just picking the strongest and best plant that you grew. So as far as is it a valid method? Sure. But it's just seed saving practice. That's how I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have the desire to sign up for, the thing. This is the way that I do the thing of gardening. I think I'm probably a bit biased, insert new method to me. I'm initially questioning its validity, right? That's my initial position, which maybe isn't as kind of open in area as I'd like to be, open minded as I'd like to be, because I just don't know if we're coming up with a whole bunch of new stuff. It's kind of like what we're doing has been done.
Yeah, I was just reading. I saw something that popped down. It said, "What is landrace corn?" Um, it's a genetically diverse strain that cross-pollinated freely to adapt to local conditions. So the Indiana grower had started by interplanting hundreds of different corn cultivars and allowing them to interbreed without restraint. And then that's
I can't see you.
yeah, I know. The camera didn't switch.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that she didn't want me to look.
Yeah.
Uh,
So I mean, if you
and
if you take that brief sentence right there, I mean, what are we talking about here? You know what I mean? Like, you're creating this corn, and ultimately, you're kind of letting nature do its course and figuring out, hey, what's going to be the strongest, what's going to be the best. But in that corn was still cross pollinated,
yeah,
and in a way, and it seems like a stretch because you could use it to validate any argument you want. But in a way, you are relying on cross-pollination to create a new seed for you without human intervention. So with that being said, I don't know. I don't
is it
know.
as pure as it sets out to be?
Yeah, it's like on the surface, it's like great, but then you start
Mhm.
getting down into it and, reading about it. I mean, I planted Napa cabbage this year, and I planted some older from the seed company that I do not like, Baker's Creek Seeds. And you know what happened, Batavia? This has
What
happened
happened?
before.
Yeah.
I've struggled with Napa cabbage, and I've got one. I've got one. I've got a cabbage. It's heading. It's ready. I'm going to pull it in a week. But every other plant is not growing the same.
Mm.
It was cross-pollinated, and I got bad seeds from Baker's Creek. So I look at them, and I'm like, these don't look like Napa cabbages. I pulled them out of they were old seeds. I didn't really expect them to germinate. So I planted heavy, but every other one is a Napa cabbage. And I don't know what the other one is. So where does that lead? You know what I'm saying? So it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
this is the problem when you start getting into like manipulation of seeds and stuff like that. You kind of don't know what you're going to get. So
Mhm, mhm.
I agree with picking your seed, seed from your strongest plant and going that way. And if you want to call it landrace and give it 5 years, fine. But if not, then that's fine too, you know. But I
Good job
don't,
on your seed saving practices. Yeah.
yeah, just practice good seed
Mhm,
saving practices.
mhm.
Don't get desperate and take from the weak plant. It doesn't work out well. I can tell you from experience. So back to the question, make sure we answered it because I feel like we kind of went a little bit crazy there. Um, yeah, what is our perspective? Well, there you go. That's our perspective.
Mhm.
Is it valid? Should we call it landrace or should we call it seed saving practices?
I don't know, in the scope of an hour and the one screen I brought up, I'm gonna opt out.
Yeah. I tell you what, if I get a wild hair, I'll read the book and then
Yeah.
we can go from there. We may revisit this one because I am curious. All these different methods frustrate me because it gets confusing. But
I
if
mean,
you,
I'm gonna do a couple more searches on it,
yeah, absolutely.
you know.
Yeah. And I want everybody to understand too, this is, we had never heard of this. So this is, we
Mhm,
could be totally off base, but
mhm.
based on a very quick search and our knowledge that we've acquired over the years, this is our opinion on it.
And
So,
part of the design of the question of the day is not to completely, spend hours researching it. It's
yeah,
it's a part of the organicness of the show,
right.
right? So every now and again we'll look at it one and say, no, this needs to be an episode, which allows us time to kind of dig a bit deeper. And I'm kind of hoping that that this doesn't become a full episode,
Well,
unless I find something really interesting in my search.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We can't research but so much, everybody. But Sarah, thank you so much. It is always good to learn about something new and to question what we're doing. So that's exactly what we
Here,
did.
here.
If you
That's
like,
anti what I said, but that's absolutely the way I feel.
yeah.
I'm kind of old ball humbug, land what? I don't want to hear about anything new.
Yeah, nothing new,
But
just the good
no,
old stuff.
absolutely. Continue to challenge ourselves.
Yeah. But if you'd like to be like Sarah, you can do so by Backyard Gardens Community Garden Facebook page. We've got one coming up from our YouTube channel, so check that out, Backyard Gardens Podcast, or you can send us an email. Whatever you want to do. Those are the three places that we can get it from. You'll like the one from YouTube. Don't go look for it. I want to
I
surprise
won't.
you with it.
Okay.
And you have to answer it.
Okay.
We're going to give you everybody, there's just a warning. Everybody's like searching now. Let me go find the question,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
but yeah.
And I'm like, this is no different than anything else that he just insists on enforcing rules that I've never agreed to, but sure.
Your contract's up, so we just have to work through it now. It's freelance. All right. If you'd like to support us, come check us out on YouTube, please. We'd love to see you there. Become a patron, become a subscriber. And remember, when it comes to gardening, we do two things. We learn to grow, and we absolutely will grow for change.
See ya.